Welcome to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Gina-r-Farrar. Each week, I bring you an inspiring conversation to help you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife so that you can not only survive, but thrive in your second half. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and today we are going to be having a very important conversation, one that will impact every single one of our lives. We are going to be talking about how to pre-plan and prepare for the process of going through mom and dad's house. We can have discussions before they pass, and what do you do to prepare, and what do you do after they pass with all of those things emotionally, physically, and in relationship with those in our family. And to have this conversation with me today is Julie Hall. She is the estate lady. She's a nationally recognized personal property expert. She has assisted thousands of individuals across the country in the daunting task and often painful process of managing their deceased loved one's possession. So without further ado, Julie, thank you so much for coming on my show today.
Oh, thank you so much, Gina. I'm so happy to be here.
You know, believe it or not, this is the first time I've had a conversation about the actual, executor process. Like, what do you do when? I've done caregiving to parents. I've done all of that. And so when your name came into my email box, I was like, yes, because it's really such a big, complex thing for a lot of people. And so what I'd love to do is to learn a little bit about you. I know you've been doing this for almost 30 years, so you've got a lot of experience, but tell us a little bit about yourself and why this is your mission and message.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yes, I've been in the industry about 30 years, and when I was in my late 20s, and I started dabbling in the industry, and I felt a pull toward seniors. I always had a special relationship with them. And as I got to know them better, I had seen some things that really affected me negatively. I saw that there was no plan in place. I saw that sometimes parents outlived their children and they would get taken advantage of by even friends and neighbors. Sometimes I saw memory impairment problems, maybe stages of dementia, and they were giving things away or throwing things out. I started to see things that I didn't like, and I thought long and hard on it and decided to become an advocate. So the first half of my career was pretty much spent being an advocate for senior citizens, and now that I'm rapidly approaching that mark myself, I work very closely with boomer children and younger generations who may have lost their parents. There's a lot to know. And what really reached me was knowing that I was making a difference in their life when they were trying to make it from one difficult chapter to the next chapter in their life, kind of like a bridge. And it's a very difficult place to get to because there's a lot of uncomfortable things that need to be addressed between A and Z. And I've become very proficient at those, some through my own personal experience and some through professional.
Now, you were sharing before we hit record your own personal journey of experiencing this. So would you please share that with the audience?
Sure. It wasn't so long ago that I lost my mom suddenly. There was no warning whatsoever, leaving behind a highly functioning father who was in his middle stages of dementia. But you can imagine trying to navigate and explaining to him what had just happened. And we were long distance. I'm in the mid-Atlantic and they were in Florida, and my sibling is in the Northeast. So there were logistics that had to be taken into consideration. And when you just find out that one of your anchors in this world left suddenly, your whole world is just completely rocked. A few months after Mom died, Dad died too, both suddenly and without warning. And then I had about a year's time to experience the great joy of raising a teenage daughter. And she was giving us a fit. And right in the middle of that time period, my own husband, at the age of 55, had been diagnosed with a terminal illness out of nowhere. And 19 months later, he passed. So I had 3 estates in a row that were handled. You would think that they would be handled differently because these were 3 of the most special people in my life. But I handled each and every one of them with the care and the love that I did with all of my clients. And using the same exact, this is how you do it. This is the methodology. And even with my own sibling, who was older than I am, when mom passed and dad passed and we needed to meet in Florida to handle the estate, he just looked at me and said, okay, kiddo, what do we do? You're the estate lady. And so we were very fortunate in that our relationship surpassed any kind of contention. And while emotions were high because of the losses that we had experienced, both of us sailed through it very, very well. And I'm so proud of us for that. But that just added another leg, another whole new part of the estate lady, where I was able to really see and feel what my clients were going through.
That gives you such an insight that you can know through other people's experiences. Isn't it so different when it's yourself?
Oh, yes, it is different, and I've always been the kind of person who felt that if you could put yourself in somebody else's shoes, that would be me. I would be that kind of person who was very compassionate and kind, but it is different when you're dealing with it in your own little world. There were a lot of things to take into consideration, and I learned some things through those different processes too.
Now, your bio said that your greatest passion is educating heirs, executors, and professionals who need to understand the complexity of personal property issues. So let's talk about those complexities, because I know there's varying degrees of personal property ownership. Some people, like my mom and my mother-in-law, they don't have anything to leave behind. Not a car, not a house, there just isn't anything. But then you have people that have trust funds and estate and, money, lots and lots of money. And if I'm not mistaken, that can really make it actually more complicated. So why don't you share a little bit about what that looks like, what you're teaching people?
Well, let me just take one little step backward. Whether someone has monetary or physical possessions or not, believe it or not, feuding is still at an all-time high because value, I'm an appraiser, and most of the time I have a tendency to look at things in terms of what is the fair market value of this silver bowl. But emotional value, sentimental value is something that you can't put a price on. So you may have 2 siblings, for example, who are fighting over mom's hairbrush or grandpa's spectacles that they always remembered him wearing, or a necklace or something very simple. They don't have to live in a mansion to have fighting. I see it across the board, whether someone has net worth or not. But it does get complex. The more assets you own, the more complex it becomes. And sometimes, unfortunately, that will involve multiple lawyers as well because of the fighting. For me, it's about communicating with people what is going to take place. It's going to happen. There's not an if here. And it will be paralyzing to the people it happens to, but it will be less so if they have some sort of plan in place. For example, did you know that 50 to 55% of us don't even have a will? So if you were sitting at a dinner table with friends, both people on each side of you don't have one. Now, bad things can happen if you don't have one. It's really important to have even just a basic will, but let's take it a step further. what if somebody hasn't left their children or their heirs advance directives? What happens if they have a stroke and it renders them in a state where, a decision needs to be made? Now, if you don't instruct your children, your heirs, what you want and what you don't want, then those children are going to end up guessing. And then later in life, they're going to beat themselves up because they don't know if they guessed correctly. So they could equally be dealing with guilt issues because mom and dad did not give them any kind of direction that they can follow. Okay? So even though I had personally my ducks in a row when all of this happened, you better believe I tightened up all of my legal documents by the time my husband became ill, because what if something happened to me? I wouldn't want my young adult daughter in limbo. And this is what I'm seeing most of the time, Gina. I'm seeing the kids are left with no guidance. They don't know who to trust. They don't know what it's worth. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know where the documents are. And we haven't even begun to touch on where are the keys. Does anybody have mom's password? Where are the documents located? Who's got the last copy? So you can begin to see that this onion has a bunch of layers. And the kids don't really see this until they're thrown into it. And when they are thrown into it is when there's a crisis. So a little bit of planning ahead of time is an amazing thing. And this is what I tried to teach people. My own mom and dad practiced this. My mom sent me an email maybe a couple of years before she died. And she said to myself and my brother, "Hey, kiddos, I know this is morbid, but your dad and I have put together 2 binders of our assets, of what to do with our home, what to do with this, what to do with our personal property. Donate this, donate that. Julie, make sure I'm wearing my little Liberace cruise dress when you bury me." And she says, "These are our wishes, and we're doing as much of it as possible now because we know you kids are going to be grieving then." Well, mom sent me a binder, and she sent my brother a binder with all of her wishes. And do you know, when that day came that we received the phone call, both of us grabbed the binder and ran, got to a plane, got to our car, and we realized the value and the love that was in that binder. I was on a plane reading it, or I should say rereading it, and I realized at that moment, wow, what a legacy to leave. She had her ducks in a row. She doesn't want her kids to suffer any more than they have to. Unfortunately, we deal with a lot of people from that generation. They're known as the silent generation. They don't believe in discussing their finances or their personal lives, or do they have debt? They don't want to talk about it. And I'm here to say it's time to talk about it, and to come from a place of love and compassion. It doesn't have to be rude or insulting. It could be something like, "Mom, I'm worried about you. Let's go over some things and make sure that everything is exactly the way you want it, because I don't want to be the one left to guess. And I want to make sure, are you comfortable? Do you have enough money to be comfortable? We need to come up with a plan if you don't. Or, Mom, do you have a will? If you don't, we need to talk to somebody about that, because we don't want to have to go through the probate process. Or is there debt in the household? If it is, that often needs to be addressed." So there are many conversations. One of my favorite being, you remember when Uncle Joe died and nobody spoke to each other the week of his funeral? And here we are 30 years later and nobody is still speaking to each other? We don't want that to happen either. So I think that if the adult children, I'm in my late 50s, so we have to give our parents the chance to talk to us. "Mom, what do you want? Do you want this? tell me what you want. Don't leave me to guess, because I'm not going to feel good about it. And it's amazing how you can open up those doors and windows, and don't be surprised if sometimes they open it up too and say something like, when I die, you can do this with that or this with that. That is the perfect window of opportunity. Mom, let me go get a notepad. We need to start writing these things down, documenting what you want, what you don't want. And as a matter of fact, why don't I help you start downsizing or thinning out the house a little bit? So there's many different directions you can take. Just listen to what they're sharing and listen to what they're not sharing. They could be uncomfortable, they could be in pain, they could be in debt, and the children not know it.
It's such an emotional experience, really, because for a lot of people, at least I've watched other people go through this, and it has torn families apart. And the emotional journey is so complex. It's our own emotions, and history with the people we're engaging with because of the loss, right? Our emotional connection to the things, right? So there's so many things going on. Are there things we can do to emotionally prepare? I know that seems like kind of a vague question, but, it would seem to me that what you're espousing with doing the binder and having that in place would help with the emotions.
It helps a little bit. Unfortunately, I have that experience with my own parents and husband. So I can tell you, when the moment happens, you don't feel like you've prepared at all. You just feel like a spear went right through your heart. But by discussing it openly and in advance, let's stop right there. What if you don't have warning? With my husband, we had warning. So we were able to make a plan for what I was going to be left with after he passed away. But many people die without any kind of plan. And so that's when the crisis occurs. But by talking about it, by documenting it, by bringing in certain professionals, maybe you need to speak with a financial professional, maybe you need to speak with an estate planning attorney. Doesn't mean you have to keep going back, but maybe invest just a little bit of money to get their advice, because every state has different laws. Now, from a personal, very personal perspective, I remember talking to my mom when she wanted to talk about it and I didn't. I was like, Mom, this is really, I don't want to think about that day. And she said, well, honey, I know, but you need to listen to me because I want you to. And I realized she was trying to communicate with me on some things. And she was such a cool lady. And even when my husband was toward the very end of his life, there were things he wanted to say too. And I think it was very important to encourage open dialogue, to emphasize and remember the good memories. When you went on that trip and you both had a great time, or, hey, Mom, remember the family reunion back in, 1994? And I think it's really important to relive the good because you're in the midst of dealing with something very sad. So try to concentrate on the good and the positive. That worked a lot for me. For me, I do a lot of journaling anyway. So even if nobody ever read it, just writing it on a Word document on my laptop helped me get it out. There were a few times I had to jump in the car and say I was running to pick up a loaf of bread or some bananas, but in reality, I was just going somewhere public to sit in my car and cry my eyes out. And that helped too. Even if you go to a girlfriend's house, you've got to purge. You've got to try and let it out, because I think if you hold it in, and this is from experience too, anger comes out, resentment comes out. And that is a time when you need to be graceful and compassionate and listen and just kind of open yourself up to that experience. And I'll tell you something that I have not shared with many people. It would have been easy to give in to the dark side. It would have been really easy. At the same time, I was dealing with a difficult teenager, going through, menopause. It would have been easy, but I fought it and I fought it and I fought it, and I did it by trying to eat better, and I did it by taking certain vitamins and supplements that I knew would calm me down, herbal teas that would calm me down, did a little yoga, anything I could think of to ground me, And then there are other ways too to get out your frustrations, but try to take any of the negative, any of the bad, any of the sad, and try really hard to turn it into something good. My mom must have thought that she was going to die soon, because that same time we had that conversation, she called me into her bedroom and she handed me a gold ring with a purple stone in it. It doesn't have much value, but when I was a little girl, I used to sneak into her bedroom and I'd open up the jewelry box and I'd try it on. And it was huge because my fingers were so little. Do you know my mother gave me that ring? And she said, I know it's not worth anything, but when you were a little girl, you used to sneak into my room and try it on. And I said, you knew that? And she said, oh, a mother knows everything. She goes, and now it's time for you to enjoy it. And so here's another great thing people can do. Gift while you are still living. Not only do you get to see the joy on the recipient's face, and that is a very special moment I had with my mother, that every time I wear purple, I put on that ring and I smile because I remember that moment. So gifting you get to see that joy. It also minimizes fighting in the future, because if the item, whatever it is, has already been gifted, it's kind of late to fight about it. But there are a lot of unscrupulous people in the world and a lot of unscrupulous heirs, and sometimes they'll go in and say, I want that, Mom, I'm going to take that. And then Mom dies and we have he said, she said, going on. But gifting is a smart thing to do, especially if women have some jewelry or silver that they would like to divide among granddaughters or maybe even a daughter-in-law.
When we're all still here together, we think none of this will happen, right? We really don't think about, or maybe we're not aware of, the dark side of the people we're in relationship with.
That's right.
So it's a harder thing to prepare for, isn't it?
Well, yes. And not only are you, some of your listeners may think this is a little far-fetched, but it's not. It's actually anticipatory grief. When you start talking about these things with your family, you are accepting that this day, this moment is going to come. And that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. So not only do you have the emotion of thinking about life without them here with you, but then you think about the behaviors and some of the things that these siblings will do to each other. That, on top of grief, on top of everything else that you're going through, is atrocious. And it's not a time to be that way. But my mom always said, weddings and funerals, you really see people's true colors come out. But if I had a dollar for every time a sibling approached me and asked me to do something sly on the side as an appraiser, I could probably take a nice little vacation. But I always just say, I'm sorry, I'm not one of those people. I'm going to help everybody at the same time. Sometimes things disappear even before a loved one dies. It could be on their deathbed, and they go into the other room and they're digging through the jewelry box or whatever it may be, or they know where Mom stashes the cash, or I've seen it all. And I could tell you stories that would make your hair stand on end.
Well, we can't really control other people, unfortunately.
No.
So what is a good basic plan for someone who is maybe at the beginning of this and they know we need to do something? What are kind of some preliminary, like power of attorney, or what's the difference between a will and a trust? Can you walk us through kind of that legal overwhelming stuff? Because it does feel overwhelming if you don't know anything about it.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I had lawyers help explain these things to me, but I will share what I know. I think everybody really needs to have a basic will, which is basically a testament to what your wishes are and what you're leaving behind. If you just have a will, it could be left open to probate. And probate is a process that can take a few months. It can take a couple of years. You know, they establish debt and who the creditors are. Nothing is really supposed to be done until all of that is taken care of. Also, if somebody decides to have a trust, there's a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust. Now, I don't know much about the irrevocable trust, only that it cannot be undone. But a revocable trust generally relieves the estate of having to go through probate most of the time. So these are things that I would really encourage your listeners to speak to an estate planning lawyer or an elder law attorney. They should be able to find some in their cities where they're located. It is really important to buy an hour of their time to find out what mom or dad need if they don't already have it. Now, once you have these documents, somebody has to keep track of where they are. So, you know, the executor has to be chosen, executor or executrix. The older generation has a tendency to select the eldest son because that's their mindset. And I'm here to tell you that is not always the best choice. You know, I see a lot of procrastination, and although my brother was fantastic at it, he's got a good mind for that kind of thing. But a lot of the female children through the years, I think kind of got their nose out of joint a little bit, and I understand that. But let me give you something to think about. Co-executors is no slice of cake, because he said, she said, he wants, she wants. So the more cooks you have in the kitchen, the more difficult or challenging it can become. I think once you have these documents put to the side, certainly they're welcome to make an addendum, and they can do that on their own. You know, I want Josie to have this, and I want Bobby to have this. And a lot of people say, oh, well, I'm just going to put sticky notes on the backs of items. Well, do you know how many sticky notes and stickers fall off? Do you know how many unscrupulous people remove them and put them on, you know, something else? So I think having something written in document form and placed with the will and or trust is very, very important. I think it's also important to not only engage in these conversations with your parents or your spouses or whoever it is that you're going through this with, and not only discuss openly what their wishes are, because the documents are going to cover the basics. The documents don't touch the emotions, you know, and there's a lot more to it than that. I would also say make sure that you have passwords. Where are the keys to the car? Where is the title to the car? The deed to the house? You know, the mortgage papers, very, very important to find. If they have insurance documents, where are they? If there are any financial assets, it begins trying to gather all these documents either when they become quite ill or after they die. It can take months just to sort through the estate, because a lot of times the mail hasn't even been opened. So somebody should be staying on top of these things all along. It doesn't mean stick your nose in their business. It just means kind of know where this stuff is. I think it's really important to develop a certain behavior yourself, and it's called a positive mindset. Because everything we're dealing with is so heavy, we have to be light about it. So be good, be jovial as much as you can, be compassionate, be kind, share. If there's something you really, really want from the estate, but it means more to your sister or brother, give it to them. Take a picture of it and give it to them, because here's a news flash. One day, our kids are going to be doing this for us. And then our children are going to have to be dealing with all of our stuff. That's why we're seeing a huge trend for boomer children or middle-aged adults who are already downsizing because they're thinning out. I'm doing it. I don't need this house. I plan on selling this house within the year. And embracing a simpler life for myself as I begin to age, because there are things that are more important to me now than the stuff. And if most of my clients could see how their children or grandchildren are going to handle these heirlooms, it's going to go on a table at a yard sale, or it's going to be thrown in a box and donated somewhere. That's what's going to happen. So what's important to this generation is not going to be important to the next generation, is not going to mean anything to the next generation, because history dies a little bit at a time. And some people don't even care about the history. Some people do. But as the generations trickle down, you kind of lose some of that.
That's a really great perspective to think about, is more global. Not quite so in the moment. Stepping back and really realizing a lot of things, the value is what we put on it. It's not technically the value of the item itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it sounds like a lot of it is managing ourselves.
It is managing ourselves and getting the facts. What is it really worth? If, let's say mom and dad or husband or wife has items that do have value, and mom paid $15,000 for a Persian carpet, which it is not worth that today. But you need to find out what these things are worth before you do anything, before you give away, before you divide the estate, before you donate, before you discard. First, get someone like myself in the house to walk through. Or, even now, especially through the COVID situation, I'm doing a lot of valuation, or as much as I can online through photographs and such. So it's important to know what you have, because if you don't, someone else will, and very often I've seen one sibling who knows the value of things and another sibling who doesn't know the value of things. So sibling A is taking the lion's share, and that's not fair. So I have long been known to preach from the top of the mountain, share, make sure everything is equitable as possible, unless there is a reason not to be. So know what you have, get a personal property appraiser in there, because what a lot of people are doing, Gina, is they're going on eBay and they're going, oh, look, this is worth $600. No, it is not worth $600. That's what somebody's asking for it. We have to know what it's selling for. It's probably selling for $200. And it's important to understand that because it belonged to our mom and dad, our spouse, someone close to us, instantly we're going to think the monetary value is more than what it actually is, because we're attached to it emotionally. So I think it's really important to go the extra distance and just have a little bit of knowledge. We'll save a lot of pain later.
I'm thinking about the way it kind of went down for my mom and her family. And there were 6 siblings, 3 boys and 3 girls. And my grandfather chose the second son. Is he the oldest? I always forget. He was either 2 or 3. Like he was either the firstborn son or the second-born son. And when my grandfather died, my grandmother was handicapped. So she stayed in the home for a while. But then my aunt in another state wanted her close. So she was moved up to a home in another state. And when my grandmother passed, there was no discussion. Like when she moved, everything was taken out of the house. No one asked where it went. And then when she died, no one knew like what the house sold for, because once he moved her, he sold the house, he took all the assets, and nobody ever asked any questions at all. And I always wondered how they were all so just resigned to the fact that, all the assets of their parents was completely hidden from everybody. Nobody knew what he did with it. Nobody knew how much he sold it for. I'm sure the money went to care for my grandmother up in home, but still, I remember thinking as an only child, not having any siblings to have this experience with, I don't have that connection. So it's difficult for me to understand anyway. What's it like to have a sibling? I have no idea. But I did imagine that it took so much grace to just turn their head and know that the least kind sibling was in charge and clearly left everybody out of the process. And it really bothered me, like for a long time, and it wasn't even impacting me.
I think you're very insightful, and I think your family are very kind people, because we don't see that very often. We see fighting, we see blood being drawn, so to speak. And obviously the people in your family decided to turn the other cheek. It's not so easy to do that, turning the other cheek. So I think they must have known what this other sibling was like and kind of made peace with it. That's extremely rare. But maybe they figured he's got to deal with the bad feelings from it, and they don't. And now that I've lived through some of these tremendous losses myself, I have learned the most valuable thing of all, and it's called peace. Peace of mind, peace of spirit, peace of heart. And even though the steps that each one of us has to take are going to be very, very difficult, there's something to be said for sleeping like a baby at night, because you did everything you could. Even if somebody else hurt you, crossed you, whatever it may be, I think it's okay to let yourself be heard. So, I really don't appreciate that you pocketed mom's ring or her pearl necklace or whatever. I just want you to know that was very hurtful, because we're all in this together. And I think it's okay to present yourself. You're one of a team. And I often use the analogy of, you remember the old covered wagons back in the old cowboy movies, and you'd have 4 or 6 horses, a team of horses. Well, imagine those horses are siblings. And imagine if they all want to go in different directions. It is not going to work, right? We have to work together. We have to go in one direction. But it goes back to the cooks in the kitchen thing. And when you have one that's in charge that maybe should not be, then I think that probably goes back to somebody didn't put enough thought into it, or maybe people didn't know that he was selected ahead of time. I'm not sure. But see, that goes back to, we always choose the eldest son. I see that a lot. And some sons are fantastic. Some sons should not be the executor.
My neighbor, my daughter and I were a first responder to my neighbor in his 90s. He'd had a heart attack. And his wife came over. I would say running, but she was also 90. So it was 6:30 in the morning. She's crying out my name. She's Italian. So in the stress, she was speaking Italian, but saying my name. So we were not sure what was happening. So we jumped out of bed and ran to her house and had to find him. And through that process, the daughter was really grateful. My neighbor, we've been here 20 years, so we've known them for years. I got more insight into how the brothers were handling things and how this is, and it was just a mess. Money. Yeah. I almost feel blessed. It sounds terrible. I almost feel blessed that we don't have any our parents don't have anything or any money, because there's really, I know you said there's things to fight about, but at the end of the day,
right,
it's going to be much easier on us because there isn't anything to fight it. Well, I'm an only child, so let's be honest. Who am I going to fight? I can fight with myself, I guess, if I really want to do. But, I do find that the truth that you share, what the emotional stress does to people and the greed that rises up, I realize we can't control other people, but I appreciate what you're expressing about how we can prepare our own minds.
Yes.
So that at least we can go into it with the most balance. And one thing I wanted to revisit, you talked about anticipatory grief.
Mm-hmm.
My father-in-law died suddenly 2 years ago, and I had been probably for a year and a half before that really pushing to see if they could be buried at the military. And this is something you may talk about as well, the whole burial thing. Mm-hmm. And it was a one-page thing, and for some reason he was really resistant, but he was in the military, so I knew he could be buried. Mm-hmm. He finally gave in. I said, look, I'll print it. I'll fill it out. All I need you to do is sign it and give me the paper from the military. Turns out that obviously he and his wife, my father-in-law and mother-in-law, could be buried at a military place. I have to tell you that when he died suddenly, he had, in a weird turn of events, given me his insurance, and I had it physically, which we would have never in a million years known he even had an insurance policy. Mm-hmm. And he died right before the deadline. So basically, when he passed, I had a packet that said, call this number. Literally, the military mm-hmm. took care of all of that. It was the simplest, least stressful thing. We had to choose a mortuary because we didn't know he was going to die. Obviously, it was like a quick decision. But after that, I called one number. So I wanted to talk about burial preparation, not just the estate, but preparing for that big piece, because that's a lot of stuff to think about in the moment.
Wow, that really is. I haven't given much thought to that in quite a while, but if it weren't for my mom telling me what she wanted to be buried in, I mean, first of all, I guess you need to back up and find out, do they want to be laid to rest, or do they want to be cremated, or do they have other plans? And budget is a big factor because, quite frankly, it's expensive to die. And, my father was a military man, and their plan had always been to be buried at the military cemetery because it would always be kept up, and it's beautiful. And they felt very good about that. So we knew that much. And then when Dad died suddenly, he had lost a lot of weight. And so I had to run out and get him a new suit, because he made his decision how he had wanted to go out years ahead of time. And the only thing my brother and I really had to pay for, because Mom and Dad had prepaid everything, which if you can, that's the way to go. All we had to buy were the flowers. And both my mom and dad were very modest people, very simple people. And even my mom said to me once, hey, don't go crazy on the flowers. Just one on his coffin, one on my coffin, and maybe one for the church or something like that. And that's exactly what we did. Piece of advice. And this advice goes for if mom or dad end up in a nursing facility or an assisted living or a dementia unit, or they've passed on, take off the good jewelry. Don't let them go with the jewelry. I've seen too many bad things happen. I had one client who always had her diamond tennis bracelet. And she was in advanced stages of dementia. She didn't know. And the children kind of pushed back and said, Mom's been wearing that bracelet for 25 years. And I said, well, here's what you need to do. Go down to JCPenney or Macy's or whatever and buy a $40 knockoff and put it around her wrist and take the other one off. And I can't begin to tell you how many pieces of jewelry have disappeared from facilities, from caregivers. And I'm not knocking caregivers. They're wonderful, but there are some that are not so wonderful, just like any occupation. The same thing when you go to be buried. I had selected costume jewelry. My mom just wanted to wear a little gold necklace, so I made sure it was one of her fake ones and not one of the good ones, because I don't know who's going to take that jewelry off before she gets put into her final resting place. And that's a very sad way to think, but you hear stories a lot. So maybe just a little pair of earrings. And, it's interesting. I was the first one at the funeral home that day. And my mom made me promise that I would give her the once over and that she would look good. Make sure I look good, Julie. And she did, but she didn't look like herself. There was something that was missing. And I figured it out. It was her glasses. She always wore glasses. So I called back at the house. I told my husband to bring Mom's glasses that were on the desk. And as soon as we put them on her, she looked like her again. And so little things like that along the way, I think are very important to give a little bit of thought to, but not to go over the top, because in a few short hours, it's all going to be over. The funeral or the memorial will be over. And just make it as nice as it can be. And then we got a ton of people sent plants, a lot of plants, but because both my brother and I live 600 and 1,100 miles away, we donated those plants to a local assisted living because we couldn't bring them home with us. So, maybe give some thought to, well, how about donating to the American Heart Association or to the American Cancer Association or whoever the organization of choice may be, if it can do some good. It certainly would do more good than a plant, though the plant is a lovely thought. But I think more practically about things like that. I guess my mom raised me right.
It's so funny. I think sometimes, and I don't know if this kind of tiptoes into your territory, is how different people grieve and express that grief. Because that's another piece too, right? Because some people are very private grievers. Some people don't technically grieve. They just kind of shut it off, and other people want to talk about it, right? So on top of all the estate and the paperwork, you have people, humans, and their emotions that are commingling with the process. How do you navigate that?
Oh, I don't think anybody has the answer to that question, Gina. You just do the very best that you can. I can tell you only from my experience that when I lost my mother suddenly, I became very angry, and I was angry for a long time. I always tried to show my father, because I was a caregiver of his, kindness and compassion. But down deep, I was really angry. So that's how it handled me. And then with my father, it was a learning experience, because I walked with my father for a few months, right by it was a journey of dementia and watching the decline and trying to be brave enough to walk alongside of him. And instead of expecting him to join my journey, I jumped into his. And when he would say things like, "Julie, be careful, you're going to step on a duck," when I knew there wasn't a duck there, I would say, "It's okay, Dad, I'll move him out of the way." And it made life so much easier because I joined his journey. When I lost my husband, that one, dying so young, like that, a healthy man, he was also a military man. I felt a profound sorrow and a yearning to understand why someone's so young, why someone's so good. But you learn during the grief process that we're just not going to get those answers here, And so I think my mindset took over with, okay, time to get my big girl pants on, time for me to figure out what my gifts are, time for me to figure out what the next chapter is as I'm facing an empty nest and a whole new life in my late 50s, just like I'm sure many of your listeners, and set the mindset accordingly. I joke about it with people say, oh my gosh, you went through so much. And I just say, well, this is how I look at it. I went through so much pain and so much sorrow and so much of this that from now on, there is only great joy coming my way. Great joy. A whole new life is waiting for me, kind of like a blank canvas. I can't imagine how an artist feels when they're staring at a blank canvas, because the sky's the limit. They can create anything they want. And even though I've lost so much, I concentrated on the loss, which pulled me to the depths of despair. But then one day I woke up and it was like a light bulb went off and I went, wait a minute. You gained way more than you lost. You had amazing parents that were there every step of the way in your life. They were great role models. They were kind. They were generous. Wait a minute. You were married to a wonderful man. And even though it wasn't as long as you had hoped, that's a blessing. And you need to be grateful for it. So it was taking that mindset and doing a flip-flop. Not everybody can do that. And I have to be honest with everybody who's listening and saying, it took me a while to get there. It didn't happen overnight. It took me a good year after each one of those deaths, maybe even 2 for my husband, to realize life moves on. And that they did pass. And it was my daughter. It was my young adult daughter who said, Ma, you're still here. And they're not. And she made me realize that life went on for them in a different way. Now life has to go on for the rest of us in a different way. And so that's just my mindset, if that helps anybody out there.
Yeah. I'm emotionally processing future.
Yes.
And I think there's some healthiness to being willing to have the conversation. Back to that grieving in advance, right? When I was doing that process with my father and mother-in-law, I was inviting my husband's brothers. He's got 2 brothers, just 3 boys, to do a family meeting. And they really resisted, really resisted. But do you know, that has been the pivot point for so much that I couldn't have predicted. Better relationships with my youngest sister-in-law. She's only a few years older than my oldest daughter, because of misunderstandings that I didn't know about. They had ideas and we didn't know. And so I think having conversations in advance, you might be able to process and eliminate some misconceptions, misunderstandings, and some mislaid emotions, and kind of almost prepare for a less difficult emotional journey when the process actually happens, which is what happened for us. We were so much more in alignment. We'd had 2 family meetings. We had some difficulties with the parents. We were all on the same page. We realized we were all on the same page. And so when they passed, the boys are great. They're all kind and no greed or anything like that. But they were all able to get on board. We were able to get things done. And I really think those 2 family meetings that had really, they did have something to do with the whole, what are we going to do when they die, because they didn't prepare. But I think the preparation point that you talk about through your message actually helps the emotional journey once the family member passes, I think, because that's been my experience.
I think you're right. Even just talking about it, I mean, nobody wants to look down the road and see what you've seen. I used to get teary just thinking about it. So I understand that's very difficult. I understand it pushes people outside of their comfort zone. But there's nothing comfortable about infirmity and death. So you might as well have a game plan. Because with a game plan, at least you have some sort of map you can follow. And, you can really get involved in this journey with your parents. If they'll let you, every time you go to their house, try and help them. Oh, Mom, we don't need these Cool Whip containers and mayonnaise jars and paper clips and rubber bands and old expired coupons. Let me just take them for you. And, or Mom, look at all these catalogs. Let me recycle them for you, and so you can do a little bit and help them and be a part of it with them, because I think sometimes they don't want to talk about it. The oldest generation doesn't want to talk about it, because one of my older clients was a gentleman. He was probably about 90, and he said, "Don't you get it, kiddo?" He goes, "We talk about it, it makes it real, and we're one step closer to the grave." And I just said, "Well, I never thought about it that way." I said, "But don't you want your children to do what you want them to do to the best of their ability? Not everything can be done perfectly, but to do it to the best of your ability and try and honor your wishes." And he had never thought about it from that perspective. So I was able to, I think, in my career as the estate lady, able to turn a lot of people toward, hey, she's got some stories in her book and they're really hair-raising, and maybe we need to do something about it and prepare. I mean, there's so many things that can be done. I'm not just an appraiser. I have spent decades breaking my back, emptying attics and moving furniture and going under sinks and pulling out the ice cream maker from 1959 that nobody has used since 1961. And, all of these things can be thinned out and or have a yard sale or donate it, or, it doesn't all have to be a drudgery. It can be all part of the plan. Mom, I want to help you do this. How about this? Mom, you've always been there for me. You've always done this for me. Now it's my time to give back to you and try and do things. The problem is I see some kids that over assert themselves. Mom, what do you have all this garbage for? And they go in like a bull in a china shop, and that's just not the way to handle that generation.
Well, we have reached the top of our hour, and I would love to have you share 3 things for people to anchor in on. If this is a journey they've kind of been avoiding, or maybe they just, because we feel overwhelmed, we don't know where to start sometimes, right? It's That's not right. An unwillingness as much as it is an unknowingness. So give me 3 good places for people to start to consider.
Start talking. Don't be silent. Don't let that pattern continue. So open that dialogue is number 1. Number 2, figure out what's important to them and make sure that you fulfill what's important to them. Because one day you're going to have such a peace about it. And I think the third and the final is really simple, but very strong, very powerful. Be kind, be good. And this is going to test you on every level possible. So as I've often told my daughter, bite your tongue inside your head and, be good and kind and listen to what people are saying and try not to make it, what is it that I said? Be conversational, not confrontational. And if things start getting a little out of hand, then maybe it's time to go outside for a few minutes, and get some fresh air. Those are probably 3 of my best, because I've seen it and I know what it takes to make it through. And those things will get you most of the way there. It's amazing how simple and how complex it is all at the same time. Yep. I'm with you. It's such a complex, and here I am, both an outsider and an insider looking in, and I see the complexities. But at the end of the day, when I take all that I've learned and all that I've written about, I realize it doesn't have to be that complex. It's what we make it. And I think that's why your relatives took the high road.
Yep. And I honestly thought they handled it way better than I would. Injustice bothers me, and it's more of a principle. It's not the things, it's the actual principle behind it. But I want to thank you so much, Julie, for being a part of my show today and for having a conversation that is difficult to have for some people. But it's so nice. They can listen to this podcast from a distance. They can mull it over. They can take notes. They can, handle it at a pace that's comfortable for them. But I really appreciate you sharing your personal story and your professional story in a way that's going to help other people navigate this journey. I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much. And if there's anything I can do for any of them, I'm always happy to do that. I'm the estate lady, and I've written a lot so that people can learn and come up with their own decisions and what's best for them and their families.
And so how can they find you, Julie?
I can be found at theestatelady.com. And a new book has just been released. It's on Amazon, and it's called Inheriting Clutter, How to Calm the Chaos Your Parents Leave Behind. That word chaos is always on the forefront of my mind because that's what I experienced, but inheriting clutter. And it is pretty much a manual for going through this process.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much for saying yes and sharing with us today, Julie.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It's my pleasure. Today, friends, I've been speaking with Julie Hall, the estate lady. She's a nationally recognized personal property expert. She has assisted thousands of individuals across the country. And if you want to get in contact with her, please head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 180. I will have links to Julie and Julie's book there. While you're there, please leave your name and email address and join my tribe. I send out periodic encouraging emails. Friends, this is one of those difficult things that life brings to us, and it is something we will all go through to some degree or another. But there are resources out there, and there are steps we can take if we are brave enough to step into that lane before we want to, because it will make the journey easier on the other side. So I encourage you to take some time to really listen to this. Have conversations with your family, have conversations with your parents, with your own children, and let's navigate this thing more globally together and make things a little bit less difficult in this world. Thank you so much for listening today, my friends. Have a wonderful week. We look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.